What are the best roles in FC 25 by position? If you just picked up the game or you haven't done a deep dive, roles are brand new to FC 25 and they matter heavily. If you want to maximize your formation, your tactics, your player usage, all encompassing, you should be focusing on roles with your squad building. Initially, I wanted to rank these into tiers. We've done many of those on the channel, but the setup with roles is still too much of a collective and has multiple factors and hypotheticals as a grouping. And that's why I'm going to break it down by position. I'd like to preface, if you want certain roles in certain positions, you might have to pay a bit of a premium. I'm just throwing it out there. Goalkeeper, not one of those positions, and sweeper keeper is what you're looking for, at least how it stands currently, because goalkeepers cut out angles, they get out quicker. It's been so difficult to beat them in 1v1s. You're not going to be ball rolling goalkeepers present day. They're out there. Center backs, the best role, hands down, is defender. It's a classic, but all things considered, it alleviates risk. So when you look at stopper, you look at ball playing defender, that's the real reality, is the positioning is not as guaranteed as having defender. And it does not mean you can't use those roles, you won't have success with them, but if you are measuring percentage play and the way that the track back works and the AI assistance and so forth and so on, if wins are your top priority and defending, positioning, again, highest priority, for most people, I believe defender stands out. As for the fullbacks, the actual formation and your tactic matters dramatically. Let me explain what these sort of look like. And again, I want this on the record. If you want the best results using players that have the role identifications, whether it's a plus or it's a double plus plus, it will matter with the naturalization, the performance, positioning, the extra boosters. False back, it has become quite popular, but I'd like to give you two sides of the lens. Without the ball versus with the ball, and you can see it's much more central. It's more difficult to play out of the back if you are using false back, but if you're going with something a little more narrow or even overlapping runs, you could potentially put a fullback more centrally and you'd have additional width. But I want that in the video because it's not going to be for everyone. I saw so much messaging around the overpowered nature of false back, and I don't think it told the entire story. Attacking wingback, that's coming in hot. Fire, fuego. What happens is with the natural wingers, and we'll get to this, you have them cutting inside or more with central positioning, and then you can send your wingbacks on those runs. Fullback, a bit more classic. If anything, I almost feel as if people are using some of the more shifty placements when it comes to your fullbacks in particular. And then you have wingback, where again, you're chasing those overlapping runs. And I'd like to talk about a couple combinations that are rather common regardless of the formation. What you will see happen is someone will take a center mid and potentially play that center mid, maybe holding, and then you would send your fullback in a more attacking role. So you'd have an offset of one player sitting deeper and the other one making space, just to give you some reasoning around tactics and roles and many competitor setups. On paper, this looks quite funky, but you sort of get the idea of what I was talking about. Camavinga would be holding, Udogie is going, and even with Neymar, he's got an inside forward, so he's stepping into space. You can kind of overload that side if you choose. Outside midfielders or wingers, inside forward is going to be common work. And the reason that this has become so popular, your wingers will step into space, they naturally get the diagonals needed for travellas or finesse shots, and then if you send your fullbacks as attacking wingbacks or just wingbacks in general, you now have almost a flying V going forward, and it's difficult to deal with. You are always going to have an open player, and you're just more dangerous for where the game currently is with so many goals going in from outside the box. Winger, a bit more traditional, and of course you can make this even more attacking if you wish. It's all about spacing. When I look at tactics this year in particular, it is maximizing the spacing both offensively and defensively. And on the defensive end, at least in my headspace, you want something foundational. However, in the offensive end, you almost want something a little more unorthodox. You always want to be overloading. You want to create a little bit of organized havoc. So almost opposite approaches, but I think it's a good way to look at tactics and formations. Defensively, you have rules. There's a universal goal in mind to not concede goals. Offensively, you still have an engineered attack in some ways, but if you can create fluidity, if you can create moments of greatness, if you can create those 1v1 matchups, you're putting yourself at a competitive advantage. Wide playmaker, I tend to not use this. I'm not saying that it's bad, but it's not where I'm noticing the best results for my wingers and the way that I'm setting up a bunch of the squads. With wide midfielder, and I haven't seen this necessarily introduced, I'm not sure why you would go defensive unless you were just tracking back everyone, which could make sense if you're parking the bus, but that would have to be part of a different tactical approach. It wouldn't be your full 90. Just to re-up, inside forward is what you're looking for. Center mids, if you use the role holding, if it's more naturalized, I actually find that my spacing between the attackers and the center mids ends up being too big of a gap, and my opponent is able to have way too much time. So you have to be relatively careful with holding unless it's a defensive setup, or maybe you have one player that's on holding while everyone else is going forward. So he kind of sits on top of the back line. You have a bit of a stopper, but it's because you've put so many attackers into motion. Deep lying playmaker, I would recommend experimenting with this role. Even though it says it's defender focused, which I'm not saying it isn't, you definitely achieve something on the offensive end. It has a different feel comparatively to holding. Box to box, somewhat self-explanatory. On record, you better have someone with some stamina, maybe even a relentless if you're gonna go with a box to box, to go with having this as a role. Can I mention that again? You wanna see plus signs. Defensively, I'm not as adamant with absolutely hands down needing a plus or a plus for the role, but it's an extra kicker, and a lot of players sit back, they block shots, they make interceptions, they take up space. As long as you aren't pulling too many players out of position, or you don't have something reckless, you'll have opportunities to make tackles. Playmaker, and what we've seen as a common theme, you would have one player potentially on playmaker and the other on holding. So you would let someone get very much so forward, and then you have someone sitting back or trying to cover for that individual. Center attacking mids, I love Shadow Striker. Cannot speak without higher applause. It supports your attacking players. You can create those triangles. You have overlapping runs. Everything has a cognitive function where they're aligned. They're on the same page. You can call it the brain if you like, but only positives when it comes to Shadow Striker from my experience. That said, with half winger, I don't like it. I don't think it makes a lot of sense, whether it's a cam or a center mid. We'll take Kevin De Bruyne as a potential option here because he has the double plus. I don't want him out wide, and if I did want a player in that position, I'd rather have a true winger, or I'd rather have a wing back. In theory, if you had, let's say, a 4-3-2-1 and you wanted to add an additional attacker out wide, maybe you could do this with the winger, but I still think back from an analytical end and a positioning end and believe in your fullbacks being more valued in this role than a center mid. Up front, we're seeing plenty of advanced forward, mainly because there's a lot of attackers that have that. Target forward is a worse version compared to Poacher.
Thank you.
I would just run up Poacher. And with two strikers, I quite like Poacher. And then if you can get someone who has false 9, the common player that I see in rotations all the time alongside false 9 is someone like a Griezmann. And the way that the attackers elevate each other and some of the positioning, they play off each other, it's noticeable if you can get a false 9 and a Poacher. I don't want you to overread into everything with roles, but the combination of roles and tactics and player selection, your personnel, it does matter tremendously when you add them all together. If you're looking for margins of not only victory, but of success rate and just playing the percentages of building the best team possible. Those are my opinions in regards to roles, and I'm not looking to sit on the fence, but nothing is that straightforward. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer anything down below in the comment section. This is still relatively new, and depending on the formation and the hypothetical and the personnel, and there is an aspect of pay to win, it just has to be taken into the equation of the role, to the player, to the formation, to the tactic. With love and appreciation to all the beautiful people. I have a lot more content coming out ASAP.